Sometimes the thing that makes a man fall the hardest isn't what you give him, it's what you take back. Not out of spite, not to prove a point, but because somewhere deep inside, you finally understood your own worth. You stopped explaining yourself to someone who was never listening. You stopped showing up for someone who stopped showing up for you. And in that moment, when you quietly step out of the role he got comfortable seeing you in, something shifts. He starts to feel the space you used to fill, and it's louder than any words you ever spoke. Because leaving isn't just walking away. It's you saying, I'm done proving I'm worth staying for. And that's when he realizes you always were. There's a kind of silence in relationships that can feel heavier than any argument. It's the silence that comes when your heart is tired, when you've tried to meet someone in the middle, but they stayed right where they were. You don't talk about it to your friends. You don't make a scene. You just start carrying that weight alone. And in that space, you begin to realize something. Love isn't supposed to make you disappear. It's supposed to make you more of who you are. But when you've been shrinking yourself just to hold on, leaving can be the first honest thing you've done for yourself in a long time. And it's in that decision, the quiet reclaiming of your voice, your value, your boundaries, that something powerful shifts, not just in you, but in the way they see you. When respect leaves a relationship, it doesn't usually slam the door on its way out. It slips away quietly, piece by piece, almost too slow to notice at first. It starts with small things. The way they talk over you in a conversation, the subtle dismissal when you share something important, the sigh when you ask for help. You brush it off because you love them. You tell yourself they're stressed, tired, distracted. But over time, those little moments add up. And before you realize it, you've stopped expecting respect altogether. You start adapting to the absence of it, learning how to tiptoe around their moods or avoid the topics that used to bring you close. You shrink parts of yourself just to keep the peace. The hard truth is, when respect leaves, love feels different. You can still care about someone deeply, but without respect, that care stops feeling safe. You can't relax into the relationship the way you once did. Every interaction starts to carry a layer of caution, like you're always bracing for a reaction instead of trusting the connection. And that's exhausting. Not the kind of exhaustion a weekend away can fix, but the deep soul-level fatigue that comes from feeling unseen for too long. Sometimes the person who's losing respect for you doesn't even realize it's happening. And sometimes you're the one who's allowing it without meaning to. That's the part most people don't want to look at. We want to believe respect is entirely in their hands, but the truth is, it's also in ours. How we speak up, how we hold boundaries, how we teach people to treat us, those things matter. If you've been quietly tolerating disrespect because you're afraid of conflict or afraid of losing them, what you're really doing is letting the respect drain out a little more every day. Rebuilding it means first noticing it's gone. That's the hardest step because it forces you to admit this isn't the relationship you thought it was, or the one you hoped it would be. It means being honest with yourself about the moments that hurt, even the ones you've been excusing. It means having the kind of conversations that are uncomfortable, not because you want to fight, but because you want to protect what's still worth saving. If you're in a place where respect has already left, you have a choice to make. You can keep staying, hoping it comes back on its own, or you can decide that your dignity matters too much to wait indefinitely. And here's the quiet truth. When you choose the second option, you're not just leaving a person. You're leaving behind the version of yourself that settled for less than you deserve. That's when you'll feel the shift. That's when you'll see that sometimes the deepest act of love for them and for yourself is walking away before you've lost yourself completely. Walking away without anger is one of the hardest things you'll ever do in a relationship, not because you don't have a right to be angry, but because you choose not to let that anger be the thing that drives you out the door. Anger is loud. It feels powerful in the moment. It can make you feel justified, even strong, but it also leaves a trail behind it, words you wish you could take back, moments you can't undo. And when you leave with anger leading the way, you walk away with pieces of yourself still tangled in the fight. You may get out of the relationship, but you stay emotionally tied to it through resentment, through replaying the worst moments, through the what-ifs that come from unfinished wounds. The real strength is in leaving when you've already worked through that storm inside yourself. It's when you've cried the tears, felt the disappointment, sat in the grief of what didn't work out, and then decided calmly and clearly that you're done. That's when walking away becomes an act of peace, not punishment. You're not leaving to prove a point, to make them see what they've lost, or to get a reaction. You're leaving because you've chosen yourself without needing them to agree you're worth choosing. It's important to understand that walking away without anger doesn't mean you were unaffected or that you didn't care. It means you've decided to carry the lessons forward without carrying the weight of bitterness. You've learned that holding on to rage keeps you connected to someone you're trying to release. You've learned that you don't need them to hurt the way you did in order for you to heal. And you've learned that closure isn't something they give you. It's something you give yourself when you stop trying to change what already happened. In real life, this looks like packing your things without slamming doors. It's sending the last text you need to send without waiting for a reply. It's deciding not to defend yourself against every accusation because you know your truth doesn't need their validation. And maybe most importantly, it's walking into your next chapter without dragging the past into every conversation, every new relationship, every quiet moment when you're alone. Sometimes the person you're leaving won't understand this calm. They might try to provoke you, pull you back into the chaos, or question why you're not more upset. That's because for a long time, maybe the only way you both knew how to relate was through tension and reaction. But choosing not to match their energy isn't weakness. It's discipline. It's a refusal to let someone else's emotional state dictate your own. When you walk away without anger, you're showing yourself that you can end a chapter without burning the whole book. You can love what it taught you without loving the pain it brought. And you can step into the next season of your life lighter, clearer, and free, not because you escaped the fire, but because you learned how to walk out without carrying the smoke with you. Promises sound good. They can give you hope in a moment when you're hurting, and they can make you believe things will change. But over time, you learn that words alone don't hold a relationship together. It's not the promise that keeps you steady. It's the follow-through. Consistency is what makes you feel safe with someone. It's what tells you that their care for you isn't just something they talk about when things are bad, but something they show you on the days when nothing is wrong. In real relationships, consistency shows up in the little things. It's them calling when they said they would. It's showing up to support you without having to remind them. It's following through on the boundaries you both agreed to. Those patterns build trust, and trust is what allows you to relax, to be yourself, to stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. Without consistency, you're always bracing, always wondering if today will match the words you heard yesterday. Promises can make people feel better in the moment, but they can also become a way to avoid real change. Someone might apologize and say they'll do better, but if their actions don't change, all that promise does is buy them more time while you keep hoping. After a while, that gap between what they say and what they do starts to hurt more than the original problem. You stop believing their words not because you're cynical, but because your heart has learned the difference between being told you matter and being shown you matter. Consistency matters more than promises because relationships aren't built in the big speeches. They're built in the everyday choices. They're built in whether you can count on someone when no one is watching, whether they still treat you with care after the apology is over, after the tension has passed. Anyone can be on their best behavior when they're trying to win you back. The real question is, can they be that person when everything feels ordinary? Sometimes we have to look at ourselves in this too. It's not just about whether the other person is consistent. It's about whether we're holding ourselves to that same standard. Are we showing up the way we say we will? Are we making promises just to smooth things over? Or are we committed to the slow, steady work of change? Consistency isn't just a gift you give someone else. It's a reflection of your own integrity. When you start valuing consistency over promises, you stop getting swept away by what you want to hear and start paying attention to what you actually see. You start making decisions based on patterns, not potential. And that's how you protect your trust, your peace, and your heart. Because in the end, promises can fill your ears, but only consistency can fill your life with the kind of love that feels steady, reliable, and real. Holding your boundaries when they test them is one of the clearest ways you teach someone how to treat you. It's also one of the hardest things to do, especially when feelings are involved. In the beginning, it might feel simple. You know what you will and won't accept, and you say it clearly. But over time, when you care about someone, when you want peace more than conflict, it's tempting to bend those lines just a little. You tell yourself it's not a big deal, that you're being understanding, that relationships require compromise. And while all of that can be true, there's a difference between flexibility and abandoning your own needs. Boundaries are meant to protect you, not to punish the other person. They're a way of saying, this is what keeps me safe, This is what allows me to love you without resentment. But when someone starts testing those limits, showing up late after you've asked them to be on time, speaking to you in ways you've said hurt you, ignoring agreements you've both made, that's when the real challenge begins. Because in that moment, it's no longer about whether they understand your boundaries, it's about whether you'll enforce them. The testing can be subtle. Sometimes it's not an outright defiance, but a slow erosion, small slips that, on their own, seem forgivable. They might apologize, they might promise it won't happen again, and you want to believe them. But if the pattern repeats, it's not just about forgetfulness or misunderstanding. It's about whether they truly respect the line you've drawn. And here's the hard truth. If you keep letting it slide, you're teaching them that the boundary isn't really there. Holding your boundary in that moment means being willing to tolerate discomfort. It means facing their disappointment, their frustration, or even their silence and not rushing to smooth it over just to make the tension go away. It's not about controlling them. You can't make someone respect your limits. It's about controlling yourself, deciding that your self-respect is worth the awkwardness of holding firm. That's the part that takes strength. And yes, they may push harder when you stand your ground. People who are used to you bending may not like the new version of you that doesn't. But boundaries are like muscles. The more you use them, the stronger they get. The first few times you might feel shaky, guilty, or even question if you're being too much. But over time, you'll see that holding your boundaries isn't about shutting people out. It's about keeping yourself whole so you can show up fully in the relationship. When someone tests your boundaries and you stand by them, you send a clear message. I'm willing to have you in my life, but not at the cost of losing myself. And if they truly value you, they'll adjust. If they don't, they'll pull away. Either way, you'll know where you stand. And more importantly, you'll still be standing with yourself. When effort stops, connection doesn't break all at once. It fades slowly, quietly, until one day you wake up and realize you're sitting next to someone who feels more like a roommate than a partner. In the early days, effort feels effortless. You notice each other. You make time. You listen with curiosity instead of obligation. But over time, routines take over, and the small acts that built your bond start to disappear. The good morning texts turn into silence. The intentional date nights turn into scrolling on opposite sides of the couch. You still care, but caring without effort is like trying to keep a fire alive without adding wood. Eventually, it burns out. Effort isn't just about grand gestures or romantic surprises. It's the daily choice to stay engaged. It's remembering the details they share with you, checking in when they seem quiet, making space for conversations even when life is busy. When that stops, what fades first is the sense of being seen. You start feeling invisible in your own relationship. You stop sharing as much because you've learned it's not going to land the way it used to. And that's how emotional distance begins, not with a fight, but with neglect. The danger in letting effort slip is that you don't feel the damage right away. You tell yourself it's just a busy season, that things will go back to normal, but connection doesn't pause and wait for you to come back to it. It changes. If you're not actively feeding it, it starts to wither. And when you finally notice, it's not always easy to bring back. Sometimes the lack of effort comes from complacency. You assume the relationship will run on autopilot because you're committed to each other. But commitment without effort feels like living in a house you never maintain. The roof starts to leak, the walls crack, and one day you realize the home you loved is falling apart. Other times effort stops because one person feels unappreciated. They've been showing up for so long without being met halfway that they finally pull back to protect themselves. Either way, the result is the same: connection weakens. The fix isn't complicated, but it does require intention. You can't just say you want things to be better. You have to show it consistently. That means asking yourself, when's the last time I made them feel important? It means putting in the same energy to keep them as you did to win them. It's choosing to lean in instead of checking out, even when you're tired, even when life feels full. And if you're on the other side, the one watching effort fade, you have to decide what you're willing to accept. You can speak up, you can make requests, you can model the kind of connection you want, but you can't carry the relationship alone. Effort is a two-way street. And if only one person is walking it, eventually they'll stop. Connection survives on the choice to keep showing up for each other. And when that choice stops being made, the closeness you once had will go with it. Silence in a relationship isn't just the absence of words. It's a message all its own. Sometimes it's a peaceful kind of silence, the comfort of being together without having to fill the air. But other times it's heavy. It's the kind of silence that feels like distance, where you can be in the same room and still feel 100 miles apart. That silence speaks, and it often says what neither of you is willing to say out loud, that something is wrong, that there are words being swallowed, that connection is slipping through the cracks. This kind of silence doesn't always start as a choice. Sometimes it begins because you're tired of the same argument or you don't want to make things worse. Maybe you've tried bringing it up before and it didn't go well, so you stop trying. And in the moment, that feels like protecting the peace. But over time, it becomes a wall. You start keeping more to yourself, and they do too. The space between you grows, and without meaning to, you've replaced openness with avoidance. Silence can be a form of self-protection. It's a way of keeping your feelings safe when you don't trust they'll be handled with care. But it can also be a slow form of withdrawal, pulling back one piece of yourself at a time until you're only sharing the parts you think won't cause trouble. The problem is, when that becomes the norm, the relationship loses its depth. You might still talk, but the conversation stays surface level. You might still interact, but the intimacy that comes from truly being known starts to fade. On the other side, being met with silence can feel like rejection. You sense that something is off, but you're left guessing. You start to wonder if you did something wrong, if they've stopped caring, or if they've already checked out. That uncertainty creates its own tension. And if it's never addressed, it can push both of you further into the very disconnection you're trying to avoid. Breaking that kind of silence doesn't mean you have to dive straight into conflict. It means being willing to name the distance you feel without turning it into blame. It's saying, I feel like we've been quiet lately and I miss the way we used to talk, instead of, you never talk to me anymore. It's creating a space where both people can show up without fear of being shut down. And if you're the one who's been silent, it's worth asking yourself why. Is it that you don't feel safe to speak? Is it that you've stopped believing things can change? Or have you just fallen into a pattern that feels easier in the moment but is costing you long-term connection? Silence always communicates something. The question is whether it's building trust or breaking it down. In a healthy relationship, silence is a choice made together, not a barrier that grows between you. When it becomes the latter, the bravest thing you can do is speak. Not to fill the air, but to make sure the person you love doesn't have to guess where your heart is. Choosing self-respect over reassurance means deciding that your worth won't depend on whether someone else sees it, says it, or approves of it. It's a shift that doesn't happen all at once. It usually comes after too many moments of waiting for someone to give you what you should already be giving yourself. Maybe you've been looking for their validation to calm the doubt you feel, hoping that if they say the right words or show the right gestures, you can finally believe you matter to them. And when they do give it, it feels good, but only for a little while. Because as soon as the next moment of uncertainty comes, you find yourself needing that same reassurance all over again. The problem with building your sense of worth on someone else's reassurance is that it's never fully in your control. It depends on their mood, their attention, their willingness to show up in the way you hope. And when they don't, the ground beneath you feels shaky. You start questioning yourself, overanalyzing what you said or did, wondering if you've done something wrong. That's when the need for reassurance starts to become a cycle, one that leaves you feeling dependent instead of empowered. Self-respect changes that cycle. It says, I can acknowledge my needs without making them someone else's responsibility to meet every time. It's not about never wanting comfort or affirmation from the people you love. We all need that sometimes. It's about knowing that your value isn't up for negotiation, even if they can't or won't give you the words you're craving in that moment. In real relationships, this plays out in subtle ways. It's the difference between saying, do you still love me? Because you're afraid the answer might be no, and saying, I've been feeling distant from you lately, and I'd like us to work on that. Because you already know you're worthy of closeness. It's the difference between staying in a conversation that's hurtful just so you don't feel alone, and walking away because your peace matters more than winning their approval. Choosing self-respect over reassurance can feel lonely at first. You're breaking a habit of looking outside yourself for stability, and that means you might have to sit with the discomfort of not knowing exactly how someone else feels in every moment. But over time, that discomfort becomes strength. You start trusting your own judgment. You stop chasing answers from people who aren't willing to give them freely. You learn that it's better to stand in truth alone than to stay in a place where you have to keep proving your worth, being treated well. And here's the thing, when you lead with self-respect, the kind of reassurance you do receive feels different. It's not something you've pulled out of someone. It's freely given, and it lands deeper because it's not filling a void. It's adding to what you already believe about yourself. That's the kind of love that lasts because it's built on a foundation you created, not one you're hoping someone else will build for you. There's a quiet pain that comes from realizing your presence is being taken for granted. At first, it feels subtle. A shrug when you share something important, a distracted nod when you're talking, the little efforts you make that go unnoticed. You brush it off because you love them, because you've invested so much, because it feels easier to let it slide than to create conflict. But over time, these small dismissals start to build a weight you carry alone, and the closeness you once felt begins to erode. When presence is taken for granted, it's not about grand betrayals or dramatic fights. It's about the steady invisibility that grows in its place. You notice it in the details. They don't check in as often. They assume you'll always be there. They stop recognizing the sacrifices you quietly make. And if you speak up, you're met with defensiveness or excuses. That's when the loneliness sets in. Not because you're physically alone, but because your efforts and your existence feel undervalued. It's easy to confuse this with normal ups and downs in a relationship. Everyone gets busy, everyone has moments of distraction. But when the pattern repeats over and over, when your energy is met with apathy, it's a sign that the dynamic has shifted. And the challenge isn't just in noticing it. It's in honoring yourself enough to respond to it without letting resentment quietly fester. Responding doesn't have to be dramatic. It can start with awareness. It can start with noticing how much you're giving and what you're receiving in return. It can start with clear communication about what matters to you and how it feels when it's ignored. Holding this awareness doesn't make you selfish. It makes you grounded. It gives you a map of where you are in the relationship, what's healthy and what's no longer sustainable. Sometimes people take presence for granted, not out of malice, but out of familiarity. They stop seeing the effort because they assume it will always be there. That doesn't change the effect it has on you. The erosion of appreciation, the creeping frustration, the quiet sadness. And sometimes the person who is present realizes too late that their presence alone isn't enough. Love without acknowledgement, care without recognition becomes invisible over time. Standing in your worth when presence is taken for granted means making decisions about how long you will allow invisibility in your life. It means modeling respect for yourself in a way that cannot be ignored. And it may mean stepping back, not as a punishment, but as a way to preserve the part of you that needs to be seen, valued, and appreciated. When you honor your presence, you send a clear message. Connection only thrives when it is reciprocal, when effort is noticed, and when attention is shared. You show yourself that your existence in someone's life isn't negotiable, and that the love you give deserves to be met with equal care. That clarity, even when difficult, protects your heart and teaches both of you the value of presence, the kind of presence that doesn't just exist, but is truly felt. Love can't survive without reciprocity, and the truth is most people realize this too late. When we first enter relationships, we tend to give freely, often without noticing how much we are giving or how little we are receiving in return. In the beginning, it feels natural to pour yourself into someone else's life. You notice their moods, you remember the details they mention in passing, you show up when they need you, sometimes at your own expense. And in those early stages, the giving feels good. It feels like love, like connection, like being part of something bigger than yourself. But over time, the balance of giving and receiving reveals itself. And if it's off, the relationship begins to quietly unravel. Reciprocity isn't about keeping score. It's not about counting favors or expecting a return for every kindness. It's about the mutual recognition that a healthy relationship requires both people to invest in ways both big and small. It's about feeling seen, valued, and appreciated just as much as you see, value, and appreciate the other person. When reciprocity is absent, love becomes one-sided. One person carries the emotional weight while the other drifts, often unknowingly, in the assumption that love alone will sustain the connection. And love, by itself, is not enough to sustain a relationship if the emotional labor is constantly uneven. In real life, the lack of reciprocity often looks subtle at first. Maybe they don't remember the things you've asked them to, or they forget your efforts to make time together meaningful. Maybe they don't notice your sacrifices, or they fail to recognize your needs until you've said them multiple times. You may even catch yourself brushing these things off, telling yourself it's not a big deal, that you love them, that relationships require patience. And for a while, that patience works. It keeps the relationship afloat. But each overlooked effort chips away at the foundation. Eventually, the imbalance becomes too heavy to ignore and resentment starts to settle in quietly, like water seeping into a wall. Reciprocity matters because it sustains emotional safety. It allows both people to feel that their contributions, their love, their presence, and their care matter. It allows for trust because you begin to see a pattern. This person shows up not just when it's convenient or when they need something, but consistently in ways that honor the shared connection. Without that pattern, trust erodes, and with trust eroded, the very feeling of love becomes unstable. You start questioning whether your efforts are appreciated, whether your partner truly sees you, and whether you're investing in someone who will ever meet you halfway. It's also worth noticing that reciprocity doesn't always mean mirroring exactly what the other person does. One person might be more verbal, another more action-oriented. One might express love through words, another through gestures. Reciprocity is about responsiveness, meeting someone's love with love in ways that make sense for both partners. It's about paying attention to how the other person experiences care and making the effort to meet that need with the intention to sustain the relationship. Without that attentiveness, even small imbalances become magnified, and the love that once felt effortless starts to feel like a burden carried alone. When reciprocity is absent, relationships create an invisible hierarchy. One person gives, one person takes. One person adapts, compromises, sacrifices, and stretches to accommodate the other. And when this imbalance persists, the giver begins to feel exhausted, unappreciated, and emotionally unsafe. They might start questioning themselves. Am I too much? Am I expecting too much? Is this my fault? And meanwhile, the other person may remain largely unaware because from their perspective, everything is fine. They are receiving love and care, and that feels like enough. But love cannot flourish in this one-sided way because relationships are built on the ongoing exchange of emotional energy, not just feelings or intentions. The painful truth is that most people try to ignore the imbalance for too long. They hope that if they love harder, if they give more, the other person will eventually match their effort. But love isn't a lever to pull or a transaction to balance. You cannot make someone reciprocate through sheer will or devotion. And over time, the longer the imbalance persists, the more the giver's love begins to feel like obligation, resentment, or frustration rather than the joy and warmth it was meant to be. Reciprocity also allows for growth. When both people are contributing equally, there's space for mutual support, for constructive conflict resolution, and for deepening intimacy. Each person feels safe enough to be vulnerable because they trust that their vulnerability will be met with care rather than indifference. Without reciprocity, vulnerability becomes risky. You stop sharing your fears and dreams because exposing them feels like giving to an empty room. Over time, silence replaces conversation, distance replaces connection, and love begins to fade, not because feelings disappeared, but because the emotional currency needed to sustain it was never replenished. Learning to recognize reciprocity is as much about self-awareness as it is about observing the other person. It's noticing whether your needs are being met, whether your efforts are acknowledged, and whether your presence is valued. It's about understanding that honoring yourself doesn't make you selfish. It makes you capable of giving and receiving love in ways that are healthy and sustainable. When you start holding space for reciprocity, you stop investing blindly. You stop bending over backward for someone who cannot or will not meet you halfway. And in doing so, you create boundaries that protect your heart and preserve your ability to love without losing yourself. Ultimately, love can survive only when both people are willing to show up consistently, to invest emotionally, and to meet each other's needs with thoughtfulness and care. It's not about perfection. It's not about keeping score. It's about noticing patterns, responding with attention, and honoring the shared commitment to each other's well-being. When reciprocity is present, love feels safe, nourishing, and sustaining. When it's absent, even the deepest feelings can wither under the weight of imbalance. Recognizing this is not cynical or cold. It's honest, clear-eyed, and compassionate. And it's the kind of clarity that allows you to either nurture the love you deserve or step away from the one that cannot sustain you. Love without reciprocity is love in a vacuum. It may feel real, it may feel intense, but without the exchange of care, attention, and mutual respect, it cannot thrive. Understanding this is not about giving up on love. It's about understanding what love truly requires. And when you do, you protect your heart, honor your value, and give yourself the opportunity to experience a connection that is real, balanced, and capable of lasting. Staying in a relationship where you feel unseen is a slow kind of suffering. It doesn't always hit you all at once. At first, it's subtle, a comment overlooked, a small need ignored, a gesture that goes unacknowledged. You tell yourself it's not a big deal, that everyone gets busy, that love sometimes requires patience. But over time, those small dismissals begin to accumulate like invisible weight pressing down on your chest. You begin to realize that the person you are, the life you bring, the heart you offer, is no longer being noticed the way it once was. And that's when the cost of staying starts to rise quietly, consistently, and profoundly. Being unseen in a relationship erodes more than just your confidence. It chips away at your sense of self, the version of you that believed you mattered. You start questioning your worth, wondering if your feelings are too much or too little, if your efforts are being taken for granted, if the love you give is somehow invisible. That kind of questioning is exhausting because it's not just about a single event or a single moment. It's the cumulative effect of countless small acts of disregard. And what makes it worse is that you've likely been carrying the burden silently, hoping that if you just give more, try harder, or love bigger, the other person will finally see you. The cost of staying when you're unseen also shows up in your daily energy. You become hyper aware of the subtle signals that tell you your presence doesn't matter. A shrug, a distracted glance, the sigh that comes when you speak your truth. You start to withhold pieces of yourself before they can be overlooked, protecting your emotions by shrinking into a smaller, quieter version of who you really are. And in that process, you begin to feel alone even when you're with them, because connection isn't just physical, it's emotional. And without recognition, without attention, without the mirror of their care, emotional connection fades. Being unseen also affects the choices you make outside the relationship. You start seeking validation elsewhere, looking to friends, family, or even strangers to fill the void that the relationship no longer addresses. That might feel like survival at first, but it's also a sign of imbalance. When your needs aren't being met by someone who should know and value them intimately, you begin to question whether you deserve to be seen at all. That kind of doubt can follow you into every part of your life, creating a ripple effect that touches friendships, work, and even your own sense of self-worth. One of the hardest parts about being unseen is the silence it creates between the two of you. You may try to speak up, to express how it feels to be overlooked, only to be met with defensiveness, dismissal, or confusion. Sometimes the other person doesn't realize what they're doing, and sometimes they simply don't care. Either way, the silence becomes a wall, a barrier that grows taller with each unacknowledged need, each ignored expression of love, each effort that goes unseen. That wall isn't just about distance between you, it's a distance within yourself too. You start doubting whether your voice matters, whether your feelings matter, whether your presence matters at all. The emotional toll of staying unseen isn't always dramatic, but it's profound. It's carried in subtle ways. The quiet heartbreak that comes when you notice you're not celebrated, the lingering sadness that creeps in when you realize your contributions are invisible, the fatigue of constantly bending yourself to be noticed, even when it feels like no one is looking. And over time, these small cuts add up, creating a deep, aching wound in your sense of self. Yet there's a clarity that comes from acknowledging this reality. When you recognize that staying unseen is costing you not just comfort, but identity, you begin to understand the importance of boundaries and self-respect. You realize that your presence, your emotions, your love deserve to be acknowledged and valued. And sometimes that realization brings a painful but necessary decision that staying in a relationship that cannot see you, honor you, or meet you halfway is ultimately more harmful than leaving. Leaving isn't about punishment or proving a point. It's about preserving your dignity and reclaiming the parts of yourself that have been neglected. It's about saying, quietly but firmly, I deserve to be seen. I deserve to be valued. I deserve to be loved in a way that reflects who I am. And when you make that choice, you're not just walking away from someone who fails to recognize your worth. You're walking toward yourself, toward the kind of love and connection that will meet you with the attention, care, and respect you've always deserved. The cost of staying when you're unseen is heavy, but understanding it gives you the power to choose differently. It teaches you that your emotional health is non-negotiable, that being visible and valued is not selfish, and that your heart is worthy of reciprocation, recognition, and care. When you finally honor that, you give yourself permission to step into relationships or a life where your presence is not just accepted, but celebrated. Staying unseen may feel safe at first, but the true safety comes from walking into spaces and relationships where your full self is met with the love and acknowledgement it deserves. Choosing to leave, or even to redefine how you allow yourself to be seen, is not easy. It carries grief, guilt, and fear of the unknown, but it also carries the potential for restoration. Restoration of self-worth, restoration of energy, restoration of the belief that you matter. And once you've felt that, once you've reclaimed your visibility, the relationships you step into after that point are no longer measured by compromise alone. They are measured by recognition, respect, and reciprocity, the very foundations of a connection that can truly sustain love. When you finally see the cost of staying unseen, you gain clarity. You see the subtle erosion of your heart, the invisible toll it's been taking on your self-esteem, and the emotional debt it accumulates over time. And with that clarity comes a decision point to continue in the shadow of neglect or step toward the light of being fully seen. Choosing to honor yourself is the first step toward freedom. And it is in that freedom that you discover the kind of love and life that not only recognizes your presence but cherishes it.